Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at a deep dive for Azure Policy and specifically focusing in on cost control and how we can use policy to keep costs down within an environment. Also, just a general overview of policy, and we're going to be doing a bit of a demo as well to show how to use policies and what that looks like within the portal. So yeah, let's get right into it. First off, we're going to have a little look at the challenges that we see customers having that can be resolved with policy. So a lot of the time, users are able to go into an environment and create resources without any governance being in place around that, really. They've got free run of the environment. They can spin up whatever they want. And that also extends to what SKUs they can deploy for those resources. So there's no guardrails in place to stop people deploying massive VM SKUs or massive database SKUs, which will obviously sort of rack up costs quite quickly. Also, out of the box, there's sort of quite poor visibility of who's using what resources within an environment and sort of what resources are deployed as well. So we can use policy to enhance that and really add another layer to that you can filter on and get really good visibility over what's in use. And also the main problem that we really do see is just not having any guardrails in place, which is leading to inconsistent configuration on resources. So say if you had a lot of storage accounts, you might have some with public access enabled, some with anonymous access to blobs, shared access keys in use, whereas you might want to dictate what settings can be enabled on those and have that as your default as well. So we can use policy to do that. So really, as a consequence of a lot of these things, we see costs rising within environments because the settings are out of control. There's no policies in place to stop settings being enabled and keep those SKUs down and things like that. So we're going to look at a couple of policies specifically for cost and see how we can use those to make sure those resources are in check and that the environment's all working as it should be. So like I said, we're going to go for a demo and we're going to show you through exactly how to do some of the bits in the portal, what the policies look like, definitions and initiatives and assignments, and really go in depth on a couple of those. So we're going to bring on my colleagues Mitesh and Connor, and they're going to throw it over to the portal and give you a bit of a demo there.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Adam. So yeah, we're going to take a look at policies, definitions, initiatives, assignments, and a few more things. But let's start it here. Let's get straight into it. So Connor, do you want to take us through what are policies, what is the definition, and all these kind of things, and let's take a look what it looks like and how it behaves in your environment.
Yeah, of course. Let's jump over to the portal and we can discuss it there. So yeah, here we are in the Azure portal, and we're going to take a look at Azure Policy. So you can see for me, it's the top #1 on my service right now. So I've been looking at it recently, but if it's not for you, you can just search for policy here and it'll pop right up there. Now, when you first arrive and land on the policy page, you're going to see this overview section here. A couple of things I want to point out here before we get into some of the specific policies, because it's quite important. So we see that obviously the overall resource compliance score percentage is based off all of the percentages that kind of get built up across all of your various policies, as well as the number of resources that are compliant and non-compliant. Now, very important section here is this bit at the top, scope. So right now we are scoped to all of our subscriptions that we have in our test environment. So this is giving us an accurate policy score and resource compliance score of our entire environment. So we can see all of the policies, we can see everything that's compliant and non-compliant. However, if we would adjust this to say development, which I know we don't have any policies on at the moment, we can see 100%, no policies, nothing compliant or non-compliant. So really important that you get that scope right, as that's going to dictate, what you see within this policy compliance center here. So again, we're going to go to all for now, so we can see everything. But yeah, very important to look at that scope.
So you've got 3 policies there. I can see they're assigned to a couple of different scopes. So let's take us through them. Where's their relevance to cost saving in there?
Yeah, so the 3 we have enabled, we have allowed locations. This dictates the scope and the locations that your resources are allowed to be deployed to. So good for like governance and data sovereignty. We have a deploy diagnostic settings. This is a deploy if do not exist policy. We'll come back to a little bit of those later on. But essentially what this will do will go ahead and deploy diagnostic policies to our log analytics accounts, in this case for virtual networks. So make sure you've got all your diagnostic settings deployed and in place. The last one here on our list, allowed virtual machine size SKUs. This is really where it comes to cost. So this is going to dictate the virtual machine sizes that you're allowed to deploy in your environment. In this case, we have this scope to a specific subscription. So within that subscription, only the dictated virtual machine sizes that we dictate are going to be allowed to deploy in there. So yeah, you can limit that so people can't go ahead and deploy, huge, very GPU or compute intensive virtual machines. You can limit that to a select few.
Okay, brilliant. So then if we want to deploy other policies, and where would we find all the policies and what are the different types? And let's go into a bit more detail about that allowed virtual machine one then when we see it in the list of policies.
Yeah, of course. So if we come over here to the definitions, you'll see this is where we'll find all of the policies in Azure. You'll see both custom and built-in. So you can see we have a number of custom ones that we've created, and these up top here are custom initiatives. Now, initiatives are sort of essentially policy sets. They're collections of policies that you put together, and then you can assign that initiative, and suddenly all of those policies get brought into your environment. It's also a nice way to group them together. If we scroll down, however, we're able to see some built-in initiatives here. And like I say, you can see some of these ones here can have quite a few policies. This initiative here has 652 different policies inside of it. So this is part of kind of regulatory set. So there are regulatory sets in here as well, and that we'll probably talk about later as well. But yeah, there are thousands upon thousands of policies in here. And if we come to definitions, we can sort and just see the individual policies as well. So again, number of custom ones we have that were in all of those initiatives. But we can also see if we want to just see the built-in ones that Azure provides us from out of the box, we can see those here. So again, countless. You can see all the different categories as well. Again, we want to drill down further. Let's just take a look at compute, which is where that virtual machine policy will live. And I could also search for it, but however, I can already see it here, allowed virtual machine size SKUs.
So let's drill into that one and just see what it's made up of, and how do we, assign that, and how does it work?
Yeah, of course. And as you probably saw there as well, it can be a little bit difficult to navigate, the thousands of policies within Azure. And there is quite a nice third-party solution for that. It's a website called AZ Advertiser. We did do a video on that, so should be a card in the top right of your screen popping out, and there'll also be a link in the description to check that out. And it's a bit of a nicer way to view all of the policies and discover a little bit more about them than through the portals. The portal can sometimes be a bit slow. So yeah, definitely check that out if you're interested in learning more about policies.
Yeah, it's a really good one for documentation as well, that site, isn't it?
Yeah, there's some great details in there. But yeah, looking at this policy, what do we have? What are our main points? We've obviously got our name, our description, but the big things here are available effects, right? So what is this policy doing? What's the effect is it going to have on our environment? In this case, it's a deny policy. Now, what that is going to do is kind of, as the name suggests, with allowed virtual machine SKUs, it's going to deny any virtual machines that aren't on our pre-approved list of allowed SKUs. So you can see that there. And so that's something that we set when we assign the policy. We choose which SKUs of virtual machine we want. And in this case, then it goes and denies anything that is not on that list. You can see that here in the JSON sort of template of the policy itself. So you can see how that sort of breaks down with the properties up top, our parameter here, and then we get into the policy row. So again, compute Microsoft virtual machines are not, if anything, if it's not in the field of our allowed SKUs, then deny it. So you can see the logic there. It's fairly simple in this case. It's a fairly simple policy. However, as you get into more complicated policies, these do get larger, especially when we get into deploy if do not exist, because there's whole deployment aspects of that, whole sort of ARM template aspects of that in here as well, which they have to go in and actually deploy resources to your environment. But in this case, we're fairly simple with this allowed virtual machine.
So we'll start with this simple one, and then we'll take a look at the do not deploy if not exist ones as well in a little while as well. So that's cool. So So we can see the assignment there as well. So it's worth taking a look at that. So we saw in the list in the compliance center, which means it was been assigned. So now we can see the properties of that assignment here, right? So, and then what we'll do in the future, we'll see the custom one, and we'll take you through the assignment process. But here, let's just look at this particular one that's already assigned.
Yeah, so again, when you come through into the definitions and you click on any policies here, you can see if you do have them assigned anywhere, as Mitesh mentioned. So in here in assignments, we can see, yep, we've assigned this. Is that connectivity subscription scope? And so yeah, let's click in and take a look at this. Yeah, so as you can see here in the actual assignment, we get to see the parameters, and we saw that what single parameter in the JSON file, and here it is again, list of allowed SKUs. And for our testing purposes, we've selected a few standard B1 and B2 virtual machine size SKUs just so we can show this off today. But yeah, let's dive a bit deeper and edit this assignment and take a look at some of the values in there when we first assigned it. So here we'll see our scope. So again, that's that connectivity subscription we've assigned this to. So again, that will only apply this to that connectivity subscription. So if you say if we wanted to go and deploy like a D series virtual machine outside, say to our identity or management subscription, this policy would not block that. It would be allowed. It's only on that connectivity subscription. So very important to understand your policy scopes.
Yeah, it's worth noting that this is, as it's an example, we've just done it to a subscription. In the real world, we would assign that much higher up to a management group generally, and that could be like the root, the tenant root, customer root management group, and then that policy will filter all the way through the environment. So it depends on the rules that you want to do, but in this case, we've just assigned it to a subscription without any exclusions as well.
Yeah, also important to note as well, as you can see here, once you assign a policy, you can't edit its scope. So if you want to change the scope of policies assigned that, you have to remove it and reassign it completely. So just important to note as well. On this sort of basic screen, again, we just have sort of names. We have the ID of it, who it was created by, let's see, me. And let's jump over to parameters. So again, here's that Azure VM SKU. So here's where you would select the SKUs you would allow. Again, for us, this obviously has the whole list of virtual machine SKUs, which there are a lot of. If we scroll down, we'll eventually come across those Bs. There we are. So we can see the 6 we've selected, the standard B1 and B2s. But again, if you wanted to come in here and edit this to your heart's desire, whatever SKUs you wish to allow, of course you can do that. And there's a lot here in here.
It's also worth noting there. So in our normal standard landing zones, we have our typical size of general compute ones. So they're a good cost-based option. 2 4-core CPUs and not necessarily 8 or plus. We don't go through exceptions for those ones, and we'd assign those higher up, and also the latest versions as well. So we keep that as part of our updates to our policies. We keep them up to date. So if you're moving away from version 3 of a SKU, you want to keep, if there's a version 4 or 5 out, you want to kind of move to the latest versions, because you'll also get cost savings that way as well sometimes. So it's worth noting that you're on the latest version as well. Like you can see here, version 2. There'll also be a version 3, 4, 5 as well, somewhere down the line.
Yeah. Our next tab is remediation. Now, remediation comes in more so when we're talking about our deploy do not exist policies. Because they then go and make changes to your environment, and they'll need an identity with some permissions on it to do that. We'll come back and touch on that more, again, because this is a deny policy. It doesn't need any permission to deny people from creating stuff, so we don't need to worry about remediations or identities just yet. Our non-compliance message. So this is a little custom message you can enter. This can be quite useful for your policies and allowing your users who are using your environment to understand your policies and why they can or cannot do something. So in our case, we have this message here that says only B1 and B2 size virtual machines are available to deploy in this subscription. Please choose from one of these options or contact the owner of the subscription, John Matrix, at john.matrix@domain.com. So again, what this allows you to do is tell your users what's happening, if what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. And if they have issues with this, if they, you can direct them towards a service desk or say an owner of a subscription. And so you can start processing that through some sort of control CAB method. So again, really nice and useful in there to sort of demonstrate and allow your users to understand what's going on in your environment, because these policies are kind of hidden away and not all your users are going to exactly understand why they can or cannot do something. So again, these non-compliance messages, really useful trick to be able to tell your users what's going on.
It's important for the users as well, because when they see a message from their organization, oh, this is my company, this is my team, rather than a generic Microsoft message, they're more likely to actually read it and maybe ask questions, or read it and follow the instructions inside there. Otherwise, they'll say, oh, not allowed, SKU not allowed. They're really not going to know what to do with that. So these custom messages are really useful.
Definitely.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, let's take a look at this policy in action then. If we go ahead and try and deploy a virtual machine and see what happens.
Great.
So yeah, let's head over to a virtual machine. We're going to try and create one now.
I remember we've got to do it in that scope in the demo we're showing you. So that's the scope that it's assigned to. And then
so again, we're going to try and deploy to that connectivity subscription. So we'll just dump it in a random resource group for now, just for testing. I don't know, we're going to apply anything, but just so we can see as we scroll down. And we get to our size section. So again, we already get this message right here that says, hey, only that B1 and B2 size virtual machines are allowed. So already we're getting that message. We can even click further and get more details into that. But again, what's really nice about this policy is it limits it from this screen right here. So again, as we can see, here are the 6 virtual machines that we are allowed to create in the B series. And we can only select these. So again, if we click on one of these, we can select it. And we can see this blocked by policy section. So this is where it contains all of the other virtual machine SKUs. And it is going to take a second to actually open up because it has to load, like I say, every other virtual machine SKU available within Azure. And if we click on one of these, if we wanted this B8MS, we click and suddenly that select goes away. So we're not able to pick that. And we do, again, get that nice section drop down here of saying, hey, this has been blocked. And we'll only have these ones available. So we click one of these, select, and boom. Again, we're just informed about that. No errors if we were, so we're told exactly what we're able to deploy. So really, really useful.
That's really nice. Yeah. It used to let the user carry on right until the end, and then in the early days, it used to actually go and try and build it and then fail, and then they'd get the custom. Then they'd get a system message, which was not really helpful for users at all. But now we're able to surface these messages right in the poll before they even start creation and validation of the machine. So this is really, really useful. Cool. Okay. Let's go. If we go back to that compliance center now, I've got a question on that compliance center. So we saw that policy in action. It's assigned to a subscription, but there's also non-compliant resources in there. So I can see 4 non-compliance resources. Do you want to just take us through that? Why are they there, and what does it mean, and how do we find out more details about that?
Yeah, this is really important as well to think about when you're applying policy to existing environments. So we already had some virtual machines in this environment before we deployed this policy. And so what that's done is it's showing up these as non-compliant because these pre-existing virtual machines do not fit into those standard B1 or B2 size SKUs. Now, what happens if you do have existing resources and you apply a deny policy like this over them? It's not going to delete them. It's not going to turn them off. However, what it is going to do is it's going to limit your ability to modify and make changes to them. So for example, for a virtual machine, if you wanted to say add another disk to it, change the NIC, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to get blocked by this policy, because again, these are non-compliant and that deny effect is in effect. So when applying policies to existing environments, it can sometimes be better to initially apply them in their audit effect. And so what that will do is they'll still show up as non-compliant in here, but it's not going to deny the creation or deny the modification of these resources. And what that means is you can apply that audit. You can see, okay, what's going to be affected if I put this on deny, and then you can make adjustments before that, and then you can move into and then apply deny phase. So yeah, really important there.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So let's just go back to the slides for a moment. So what we did there, we talked about policy. What is it? How is it made up? what's an initiative, which is a collection of policies. We looked at the definition file as well. We talked about assignment scopes and the different types of effects. There's quite a few effects, but the main ones are like audit, deploy if not exist, deny, and a few others. We also talked a little bit about built-in and custom policies, which we'll look at in the next section, the custom one. We'll also look at exceptions, custom messages, and the user experience a little bit more as well.
Jumping back to our policy screen here, we want to take a look at assigning a new policy. So yes, let's head into our definitions and find a policy for us to assign. So the policy we want to assign today is a Synapse SKU policy. So similar to our allowed virtual machine SKUs, this is allowed Synapse SKUs. So I'm just going to search for it right here. And it is this one here. Is this custom policy? So this is custom. This is something that we have created here at LANet and have added into Azure. So you won't see this policy, but if you obviously come work with us, then you'll be able to see it. So let's jump in and look at assigning this. So we'll see again, type is different because it's custom. And again, when you create these policies, you can create names, descriptions, you can give them, again, categories and tags and all sorts as well. So you can kind of create them just as the built-in ones look as well. So let's go ahead and assign this policy. So here you can see the scope. So again, as kind of Mitesh alluded to, we can choose subscriptions or we can choose and assign it at the management group scope. In this case, I think for today, let's just assign it that top level root management group. Here we can see exclusions. So again, this is if we wanted to exclude any subscriptions, resource groups, management group structures out from underneath this, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but you can do that here before you assign it as well.
It's also worth noting on exclusion, you could have multiple exclusions. So you could have 4 or 5 resource groups or subscriptions, for example. So it's not just one like you can on the scope, I think. So you can add multiple ones as well. So that's useful.
Yeah, they're really useful when you're scoping at such a high level like this, that you're scoping across an entire environment, but you might have that one subscription that you don't want that applied to. Again, you don't want to have to go through and assign this to every other subscription in your environment. Assigning it to that top scope and then excluding that single subscription or even single resource group, a lot easier. No, it's a lot easier for management.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's head over to the parameters. So in this case, for this custom built-in policy, this has some predefined defaults that we set in here, but of course we can still come in here and change them ourselves. So we can come in here and add more prompts in here. So we get different sizes of the Synapse database SKUs that we wanted to allow. But we're going to leave it with the defaults for today. Again, remediation, no remediation necessary. This is just a deny policy. Non-compliance message, we could create a non-compliance message. So let's go ahead and create one. Mitesh, do you have an idea of what you want to tell the users when they try and create a database that's too big?
Yeah, just say your SQL pool needs to be under the 1,000. What's the specific?
I think it's 500 or 600 is our current match. So let's say it needs to be under 600.
Yeah, and DW 500C and below or something.
Yeah, so like I say, we can customize this to our heart's content, but we'll just do this for our testing purposes here today. And again, we'll review, see everything that we've done, and we'll hit create, and this will go ahead and assign that.
Yeah.
And we already see assignments, and we can see it in here already. So yeah.
And sometimes it can take a few minutes to take effect and apply as well, can't it? So I was thinking, while that's going, it's worth looking at the exclusions and exemptions. So let's say if we go back to the virtual machine one, for example, we're only allowed B series, and I may decide, right, we're having a new production subscription. We want to create a large VM for a new I don't know, a SQL data warehouse or something. When we try and go to the portal, it's going to fail. So what would be the process and say, okay, now we want to go outside of this, and we don't want to change it for the whole environment, but just for our particular resource group, for example. Is that possible?
Yeah, so like as you allude to, obviously if you want to deploy a different size SKU within our connectivity subscription where this is scoped, we could come in here and just add that to the parameter value, right? We could say, right, cool, we're going to allow that F series, for example, to exist. But as you say, now suddenly everyone can just create an F series size virtual machine within that subscription. So again, if someone came to us and said, right, I wanted to create this size virtual machine within the subscription, what we can instead do is says, all right, cool, go ahead, create a resource group within that subscription where your resources are going to live and where that virtual machine will live. And then what we can do is come up and create an exemption. And then we can come in here and say, right, cool, let's exempt that resource group that's been created. And so we can exempt that. You can even go down and exempt specific resources as well. This is obviously if they already exist, you'd be able to do this. In our case, we've got deny on, so those resources wouldn't be able to exist in the first place. But if they go ahead and create that resource group for us, we're able to then go and exempt that.
Yeah.
We can then create a name for that.
Obviously.
Of course, yeah. We can create a specific name for that. So we could say, add say the resource group name onto this name of the exemption. You can say why. Is it a waiver? So in this case, if someone came to us and said, yeah, we want to put one in there, it'd be a waiver. Mitigated comes in more when we're looking at security related policies, and we can say they're mitigated if we're using other solutions. And then again, we can even set expiry dates. So perhaps if we wanted, in this case, we probably wouldn't need it. In other cases, if we wanted to say, hey, we're just having this exemption for a short time, we can totally do that.
Yeah.
And we can, again, write a description. So we can say, we could put the user's name in that's come to us and asking for it. We can give a reason why, and we could put all of that cab and control and any of that stuff that we have in our processes. We could put that in here so it's understood why this is in place.
And that's a really good use case, and that's a really good scenario for an audit trail as well. So, and it's a good reason to use exemptions over exclusions. So if you do exclusion, it's just not going to apply that policy. But if you do an exemption, you've got an audit trail of, okay, we've put this in, here's a change control, here's why we put it in. So from an audit perspective, the exemption works quite well.
Yeah. I'll come in here, and so what this advanced section is here, this essentially allows you to further narrow down the scope into very specific resources. You can do multiple in here. So again, can be really useful if you really want to get very specific with your scope. But yeah, we can then just hit create on this, and we can see where this will pop up. So again, as Nitesh alluded to, the Azure portal and particularly the policy section can be quite slow. So even though we do have an exemption, it hasn't quite populated there.
So let's take a look and see if that custom policy has been applied yet, and see if it lets us go forward with creating a large SQL pool. I think it's a good example, and the reason why we created that. I know one or two customers that have had people go into their environments, create a massive large data warehouse, leave it running over the weekend. By the time it's Monday, it's about $3,000 or $4,000. Or whatever they select, and they didn't even need it, they just forgot about it. So these policies help protect against those kind of things. So that's where they're really useful.
Yeah, because like as Adam, our colleague, mentioned at the beginning with the slides, none of this stuff is in place by default. Anyone's allowed to create any size of SKU for any sort of resource, database, virtual machine, whatever they want. Even AI features. We know a lot of people are deploying more and more AI these days. And that can get exceedingly expensive as it's used. So again, if you give your users access to this stuff, really important to limit what they can deploy to reduce those costs, to make sure you don't suddenly wake up to a massive bill. So yeah, obviously we've got that Azure Synapse SKU, allowed SKUs in, which is limiting our SKUs. So yeah, let's go ahead and try and deploy a Synapse. So again, we've got this workspace set up as a wee test. And we're going to come into the SQL pools, which is what this policy limits, and try and deploy a new one. So again, our policy limits us to under 500. So let's go ahead and try and create something up at 2,500. We're going to enter a name. We're going to come over. We're just going to leave this as defaults and go to review and create. And obviously, we've not seen any custom messages so far, but this is what we'll probably see it now. As we hit create, should hopefully get a failed deployment here. as it butts up against that policy.
If it's been applied, yeah, isn't it? So
yeah, so there we go. We can see error. Like I say, as Mitesh mentioned, some of the policies will allow you to get this far. Some of them, apply at that more sort of creation level. In our case, if we look at this error, we can see it was disallowed by policy. And we can even see our little custom message here. SQL pool needs to be under 600. So again, various policies will apply at sort of different stages. Again, this allows you to get to this sort of creation process, but still denies the actual deployment and creation of the resource. And again, we get a bit more details in here as to why.
Okay, thanks, Connor. Really good demo there. So what we've done there, we've talked about custom policies. We looked at assigning that policy to the right scope. We also talked about exclusions and the parameters. Then we looked at the effect of that policy with the custom messages as well. So what happens when a user tries to go against that policy? They are blocked. They've got a custom message. And more importantly, you don't get hit with a massive bill that you don't know of. So thanks very much for that. And what we'll do next, we'll take another demo. We'll look at DeployIfNotExist policies as well. And we'll also talk a little bit about remediation.
Yeah, so let's jump back into the portal and look at a DeployIfNotExist policy. So we have one of these as an example here, this deploy diagnostic settings for virtual networks to log analytics workspaces. Bit of a mouthful, but does exactly what it says on the tin. So this will check our virtual networks within the scope. In this case, it's our entire environment pretty much, underneath our root management group. And it will check to see if they are sending diagnostic settings to a specified log analytics workspace. And we can see here that they're currently non-compliant. And if we jump into the assignment, we can see the parameters here. So we can see that log analytics workspace, and we pick this when we assign the policy. We can see the effect. So again, we're choosing DeployIfNotExist. Again, with these policies, we could also set this to audit if we didn't want it to go and actually make those changes and deploy those diagnostic settings into the log analytics workspace. We have some other ones here that are sort of default values, setting our metrics to true and allowing us to choose the profile name of the settings, of diagnostic settings, and also, again, turning on those logs, enabling the logs to flow. These ones here, anything with a default value is something that if we come into the edit assignment and come into parameters, we'll see here. And again, we've got this user assigned one here that we pick. So we're picking the workspace that we're sending it to, but these all will have defaults. If we come back to the definition of the policy, we want to take a look at what this policy looks like.
We can this will be a lot more complex, won't it?
Here and view it, and yeah, this is going to be a lot more complex. So if we sort of scroll down, again, we've got a similar sort of top up here of properties. We've got a few more sections and a few more sort of metadata here from us on this policy. And as we can scroll down, again, we can see all of those parameters that are listed out. And as we continue to scroll down, we'll eventually get to, again, our policy rule. So again, we saw that on the virtual machine policy. And again, we're targeting virtual networks with this. We then have a then effect, which says, essentially goes and checks if the networks are already sending their diagnostic policies. So if they're already compliant or not. So this goes and checks for that in its existence condition. And then as we scroll down further, we then, because this is a DeployIfNotExist, essentially has its own mini ARM template in here that goes and makes that deployment, right? So we can see that deployment schema. And if you're ever familiar with any sort of ARM templates, you're probably familiar with the format in here. So again, those parameters and the resource that it's going to go and deploy. So in this case, it's the diagnostic settings. So yeah, as we can see, a fair bit more complicated when we get into DeployIfNotExists. But again, these are sort of built-in policies in here, so not something you need to worry about yourself too much. And if you ever do need to create a policy that is a DeployIfNotExist, I always find it easy to come and try and find something that's close to what you want to do and base it off one of the pre-existing ones, so you're not starting from scratch. Because as you can see, it'd be fairly daunting to start one of these policies from scratch.
especially because every comma and bracket matters as well. So
yeah, exactly.
I mean, there is tools like Visual Studio Code helps with that. You can build policies in there. You can also view the resources in your environment with the policy extension. It will show you the property type. So if you want SQL skew or whatever, you'll be able to see what that property is, and then you can do your checks against that. But that's for another day.
Yeah, and so what we do want to look at with this policy is the remediation section. So this tab we've kind of skipped over, has been sort of empty the last few policies we've looked at. So come in here to where we to edit the policy, we can see that this policy has an identity attached to it. So there's two types of identities you can use. You can use system assigned managed identities and user assigned managed identities. Now, we typically advise using user assigned for your policies. What this allows you to do is have control over the identity. If you use system assigned, it just goes and creates one itself, and Azure manages it all, which might sound nice and simple. However, there is kind of a catch with that. It goes and creates a system assigned identity for every single policy you have. So if you, in this case, this is a diagnostic settings policy, and this is part of a larger diagnostic setting policy suite that we have that has over 70 different policies in it. Now, that would mean it would go and create 70 different managed identities. And if you ever looked at RBAC, it will then go in and create a bunch of permissions and assign those permissions to these identities, and they'll show up in your RBAC and your role-based access sections there, and they will become a mess. Suddenly you'll have just, for example, with this one, with deploying diagnostic settings, the permissions needed for this, which are listed down here, which are monitoring contributor, log analytics contributor, you will suddenly have 70 different identities underneath those within your RBAC, and it's going to be a real mess. It's going to be really confusing. So we highly suggest using a single or is a small pool of managed identities to manage all your policies. So again, you're going to have a single managed identity under your RBAC rather than 70 different random system assigned ones.
It's also worth noting that if you delete or unassign some of these policies, that assignment doesn't actually disappear in your role-based access. It'll just show up as a what's it say? Unknown,
like unknown, not found.
I can't remember.
Yeah,
identity
again, like I say,
or something like that.
Yeah, so again, it'll make a complete mess of your RBAC. So yeah, highly recommend you use user assigned here. It also just gives you more control over these identities. You can assign the needed permissions as well to that.
And but again, when you create these identity object, sorry, Connor, is that a managed identity object in there? It's not.
Yeah, that is so.
Object. Yeah,
it's not a specific object that is specified to policy. Yeah. It is just a managed identity. So we can see our one there. That's that identity policy remediator. Yeah. And yeah, so if you've ever worked with managed identities in Azure before, this is exactly what that is. So remediation, what does that allow us then to do? We've got the managed identity assigned to it. It's got its required permissions. I'm just going to save this policy again. And we're going to jump back into this tab here, this remediation tab. So any policies that have like a DeployIfNotExist that can be remediated will show up in here. And again, I will point out the scope button up here. When you deploy your policies at different scopes, this page in particular, the remediation page, I find to be a little bit awkward with sometimes displaying your policies. So perhaps if you have a policy that is only assigned at a very particular subscription scope, which again, we wouldn't typically advise, we typically like to do that at the management. Perhaps there's something that you really need to assign at that very particular subscription. Sometimes even if you select all these, or if you select the tenant, and they don't always show up here, particularly when it comes to remediation tasks. And we'll take a look at that once we get this kicked off. But yeah, let's kick off this remediation. So what this is saying, it's showing us the non-compliant resources that are going to be remediated here. And so these are all going to have their diagnostic settings enabled and sent to that log analytics workspace we specified. So we can just come in here and hit remediate. And as we see, remediation task has been created successful. And now we're on this remediation tasks tab. but it can't find it. Again, this is all about scope. So because that policy is scoped at the tenant level, we need to come up to there and select, and suddenly it'll pop up. Even though we had all of our subscriptions selected before, it wasn't showing up. This tab in particular can be quite awkward with showing you what you want. So understand, again, what scope is that policy you're remediating at. You want to come in here and make sure that's set to this as well. Otherwise, you'll probably end up missing them. So yeah, if we jump in, we can click this in progress button, and we can see it coming through. It's currently evaluating these networks. And then what it will go and do is hopefully we'll get successes across the board, fingers crossed, and it will then go and deploy those diagnostic settings as we're wanting.
So if you click on that top one corner, I can see that first one's already gone in. So if we do a search for VNet-IDT, then we can look at the properties, or yeah, go through there. Let's take a look at the properties of that one.
You can click on it right here.
If you scroll down to diagnostic settings, we'll see it there, set by policy, because that was the name that we put in that parameter, if you remember. And then if you look at the audit log on this VNet, activity log, sorry, yeah, you'll be able to see DeployIfNotExist Policy was accepted. So that was done 2 minutes ago. And I think if we click into it, yeah, so you see the event initiated by, I don't know if you can see more details if you click onto it, because that'll be related to the that managed identity that you've set up. So that managed identity's description is gone and done that policy for you. So yeah, brilliant. Yeah. The only other thing I would say, it can take 12 to 24 hours sometimes for this compliance page to update as well. So just be wary of that. I think there is a PowerShell command to go and force it, but generally it'll be updated by probably this time tomorrow. So all those things should turn green under the non-compliant ones for the diagnostic settings, and then but it won't show in here for quite a while. So that's just something to be aware of. So yeah, thank you very much. I'll just bring the slides back up. So thanks very much. We looked at DeployIfNotExist policies. Other types of DeployIfNotExist are things like VM agents, settings inside VMs, and audit logging for SQL databases, and all those kind of things, even backup extensions and those kind of things. So that's just an example of diagnostic settings, but there's all kinds of DeployIfNotExist extensions and things that we can do if they're not there already. We talked a little bit about remediation, how to set off a remediation job, what to look for, and where to check as well. So yeah, thanks very much. Hopefully that was useful. We've done a previous webinar on saving money on your Azure environment, and we talk about different things outside of policy and based control, things like subscriptions, licensing, savings plans, automation. We give some real world example of how we've saved thousands of pounds for our customers as well. So, and this one was more of a deep dive into the policy-based governance. So yeah, go and check that one out, and also we'll put a link to the card that the video that Connor mentioned as well. Then yeah, check out our website if you do have any questions on this kind of stuff. Just hit the orange button, and we're happy to talk about these things. And don't forget, we can download our ebook from that website as well. If you scroll to the bottom, there'll be a link to download a cost savings ebook as well. So yeah, thanks for everybody who watched, and thanks Connor, and thanks Adam as well for the intro.